Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Archives. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. My mom told me this story years ago, and even though it didn't happen to me directly, it has always stayed with me. It's not the kind of story that relies on gore or something obviously supernatural to be frightening. What makes it unsettling is how close it came to becoming something far worse, and how easily a normal day could have ended in tragedy. It's the kind of story that makes you replay it in your head, wondering how many tiny details had to line up just right for things to turn out the way they did. This happened back in the 1970s when my aunt was a teenager. It was a very different time back then. People were more trusting, more relaxed about safety, especially young people. Hitchhiking wasn't seen as strange or dangerous the way it is now. There wasn't the same constant awareness of serial killers, predators, or the kinds of dangers people are warned about today. Most people believed that bad things happened elsewhere to other people, not in their own towns or to someone they knew. My aunt and one of her friends were spending the day together, just doing normal teenage things. At one point, they were hanging out by a pool. It was the kind of place where people gathered to cool off, talk, and relax. Nothing about the situation felt threatening at first. They were just two teenage girls enjoying their day, probably laughing, talking, and trying to pass the time. At some point, a guy came up behind my aunt. Without warning, he put a knee between her legs and grabbed her chest. It was sudden, invasive, and shocking. My aunt reacted immediately and pushed him away. She didn't freeze or laugh it off. She knew it wasn't okay. The moment was brief, but the impact of it lingered. That kind of violation sticks with you, especially when you're young and not expecting it. After that happened, my aunt and her friend decided to leave the pool. They stayed together, which already tells you they were shaken, even if they didn't fully understand why yet. They didn't split up or go their separate ways. They stayed close, instinctively knowing that being together felt safer. They tried to continue with their day, probably telling themselves that it was over, that the guy was gone, that it had just been a gross encounter with some random creep. But as the day went on, something strange started happening. They began noticing a car that seemed to keep appearing near them. It was a yellow Volkswagen Bug, a very distinctive vehicle. It's not the kind of car you easily confuse with another. Bright yellow, small, recognizable. At first, they might have thought nothing of it. After all, seeing the same car more than once in a day isn't impossible, especially in a small area. But it kept happening. They saw the same yellow Bug multiple times as they moved around, and the man driving it looked like he could have been the same guy from the pool. There was no certainty at first, just a growing sense of unease. That uncomfortable feeling you get when you start to realize something might not be a coincidence. Each time they saw the car again, it probably added another layer of tension, another quiet question in their minds about whether they were being watched or followed. As it got later in the day, they were supposed to be picked up by my aunt's friend's mom. They waited, expecting her to show up, but she didn't. Time passed. It started to get dark. Back then, this kind of situation wasn't immediately alarming, but it was inconvenient and frustrating. They had been waiting for a while, and eventually they started thinking about other ways to get home. That's when they made a decision that, in hindsight, could have cost my aunt her life. They decided to hitchhike. Again, it's important to remember the time period. Hitchhiking wasn't automatically seen as reckless or dangerous in the way it is now. People did it. Teenagers did it. It was risky, yes, but not unthinkable. They were together, and they likely felt that being two of them made it safer. They probably just wanted to get home and put the day behind them. While they were waiting for a ride, that same yellow bug appeared again. The man got out or rolled down his window and started talking to them. He was friendly, polite, helpful. He offered to give them a ride home. There was nothing immediately aggressive about him in that moment. In fact, that's part of what makes this story so disturbing. He didn't seem threatening. He seemed like someone offering help to two stranded teenagers. My aunt and her friend were considering it. They were about to get into his car. Think about that for a moment. They were seconds away from opening the door and stepping inside. And then, at the last possible moment, the friend's mom pulled up. She arrived just in time. No dramatic build-up, no warning. She simply showed up when she was supposed to, albeit late. My aunt and her friend immediately went with her instead, getting into her car and leaving with her. The moment passed. The yellow bug drove away. The day ended. At the time, it probably felt like nothing more than a close call, with an awkward stranger and a lucky ride home. Life went on. But later, much later, the context of what happened changed everything. My aunt eventually learned that Ted Bundy had been in that same area around the same time. He was known to drive a yellow Volkswagen Bug. That detail alone is chilling. Ted Bundy was infamous for approaching women in a seemingly harmless way. He was known for being charming, polite, and helpful. He often pretended to need assistance or offered help himself. He targeted young women. He blended in. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like someone you might trust. When my aunt found this out, everything about that day took on a new terrifying weight. The encounter at the pool, the repeated sightings of the yellow bug, the man who offered them a ride when they were vulnerable, and waiting for transportation. All of it lined up in a way that was impossible to ignore. Of course, there's no absolute proof that it was him. It could have been a coincidence, a different man with a similar car, a similar appearance, a similar presence. But the possibility that it wasn't a coincidence is what makes this story so frightening. Because if it was him, then my aunt was moments away from disappearing. If the friend's mom had been even 1 minute later, my aunt and her friend might have gotten into that car. And if that had happened, there's a very real chance my aunt would never have come home. She might have become another name on a list of victims, another story told years later with sadness and unanswered questions. What scares me the most about this story isn't just the idea of Ted Bundy himself. It's how ordinary everything was. A pool, a car, a ride home, a delay of a few minutes. There was no dramatic warning sign, no clear moment where danger announced itself loudly enough to stop them. It all came down to timing and chance. When I think about it now, it makes me realize how fragile safety can be, how sometimes survival doesn't come from strength or bravery, but from sheer luck, from someone being late, from someone showing up when they almost didn't, from one small decision that changes everything. That's why this story has always stayed with me. Not because it definitely was Ted Bundy, but because it could have been. Because my aunt's life hung on something as small and unpredictable as a parent arriving a little later than planned. It's terrifying to think about how many lives might have been altered forever by moments just like that. Moments that went unnoticed because the worst didn't happen. And it's even more unsettling to realize how many times people probably weren't that lucky. This isn't a story my mother ever sat me down and told me directly. In fact, for most of my life, I didn't know it at all. I only learned the truth in fragments, pieced together slowly over time, and the moment it finally came into focus was strange and unsettling in a way I still haven't fully processed. I didn't hear it from her in a quiet, intentional conversation. I heard it while she was talking to psychologists, with me in the room, listening as if they were discussing someone else's life instead of the woman who raised me. My mum found her own mother's corpse when she was a child. Even writing that sentence feels heavy. It's the kind of fact that lands in your mind and then just sits there, unmoving, impossible to make lighter. She never looked at me and said those words. She never explained what it was like or how it happened. I just heard it spoken aloud clinically, almost carefully, by professionals trying to understand her mental health. I remember sitting there, hearing it, and feeling like the ground under my understanding of my own family suddenly shifted. That discovery didn't happen in isolation. It was part of a chain of events that no child should ever have to live through. When my mum was very young, her sister died. She was just a child too. From what I understand, she ran out into the street without looking and was hit by a car. It was sudden, violent, and final in the way childhood accidents often are. One moment everything is normal, the next moment a family is permanently broken. I can't imagine what that kind of loss does to a household, especially in a time when grief wasn't talked about the way it is now, when people were expected to just keep going. Shortly after her daughter's death, my mum's mother took her own life. She committed suicide by hanging. The timing matters. Losing a child is devastating under any circumstances, but losing one and then ending your own life soon after leaves behind a particular kind of wreckage. It creates a story with no resolution, no healing, just absence stacked on top of absence. My mum was very young when this happened, too young to fully understand what death meant, let alone suicide. Too young to understand grief, guilt, or mental illness. She was a child living inside an adult tragedy, and she was the one who found the body. I don't know the details of that moment, and maybe it's better that I don't. I don't know where it happened, or how long she was alone with that discovery, or what she thought she was seeing before she understood it. I don't know if she screamed, or froze, or tried to wake her mother. I don't know if anyone came quickly, or if time stretched on in that horrible way it does during moments of shock. All I know is that a child walked into a space where her mother was supposed to be alive and found her dead instead. That kind of thing doesn't just disappear from a person. Even if a child doesn't have the language to describe it, even if they don't fully understand what they're seeing, their body remembers. Their nervous system remembers. Something fundamental about safety and permanence is broken in that moment. A parent is supposed to be the constant, the one who exists no matter what, the one who doesn't disappear. When that bond is shattered so violently, especially by suicide, it leaves behind wounds that don't always show themselves in obvious ways. I'm pretty sure this was a major cause of my mum's mental health issues later in life. Not the only cause, but a foundational one. How could it not be? She lost her sister, then lost her mother, and then had to grow up in the aftermath of that loss, without ever really being given the tools to understand it. Trauma like that doesn't resolve itself just because time passes. It settles in quietly and reshapes how a person experiences the world. Her father eventually remarried. Life went on, at least on the surface. A new woman entered the family, and she became my grandmother in every practical sense. She was the grandmother I knew, the one whose presence felt normal and unquestioned. I grew up thinking she was my biological grandmother. No one corrected me. No one sat me down and explained the truth. It wasn't a lie in the traditional sense. It was just a silence. It took a long time before I realized that my grandmother wasn't actually my biological grandmother. And it took even longer for me to understand why that fact had been hidden from me. When I was younger and asked about my mum's mother, I was told she died of sadness. At the time, that explanation seemed strange, but not alarming. Kids accept vague answers more easily than adults do. Died of sadness sounded poetic, maybe even gentle in a way. I imagined an old woman who missed someone deeply, who faded away quietly. I didn't imagine a young woman who hung herself after losing a child. I didn't imagine a little girl finding her body. The truth was far darker than the story I was given. As I got older and learned what really happened, I started thinking about how long I lived without knowing any of this. How many years I spent not understanding the full weight of what my mother carried with her every day. How many moments in my childhood were shaped by her trauma without me realizing it. How many of her reactions, fears, anxieties, or emotional distances suddenly made more sense in retrospect. There's something deeply unsettling about realizing that your parent has lived an entire life of pain you were never allowed to see clearly. It messes with your sense of family history. It makes you question what else might be buried, what other truths were softened or hidden to protect you. And it also makes you grieve for a version of your parent you never knew. The child she was before everything fell apart. The person she might have been if she hadn't grown up inside so much loss. It's probably more sad than scary, at least on the surface. There are no ghosts in this story, no monsters hiding in the dark. But there is something profoundly frightening about the idea of a child being the first to discover their own parent's corpse. That image alone is horrifying, even without details. It's frightening because it's real, because it happens, because it leaves marks that last a lifetime. What scares me just as much is how normalized the silence around it became. No one explained it to me. No one corrected the story when I was old enough to understand. I lived for years without knowing that my biological grandmother died by suicide, without knowing that my mother had found her, without knowing that the woman who raised me carried that memory quietly inside her. That gap in knowledge feels strange now, like there was a missing chapter in my own family's story that I wasn't allowed to read. When I think about it too long, it messes with my head. I think about my mom as a child, trying to make sense of a world that suddenly became unpredictable and unsafe. I think about how grief compounds when it's never properly acknowledged. I think about how children don't stop loving their parents just because those parents hurt them, even indirectly. I think about how confusing it must have been to lose a sister, then lose a mother, then be expected to keep going as if life would eventually make sense again. I also think about myself, growing up without knowing any of this, and how that ignorance shaped my relationship with my mother. How I sometimes felt distance or tension without understanding where it came from. How I sometimes blamed myself for emotional gaps that were never about me in the first place. How I didn't have the context to see her not just as my mom, but as a survivor of something unimaginably painful. There's something uniquely unsettling about learning traumatic truths secondhand, long after they happened. You don't get to process them alongside the people who lived through them. You don't get to ask questions at the time, when answers might have been clearer. You're left reconstructing a past that no longer exists, trying to understand how it shaped the present. And the scariest part might be how quiet it all was. No dramatic confessions, no family reckoning, just a child hearing a truth in a clinical room, realizing that their family history is far more tragic than they ever knew. Realizing that died of sadness was a euphemism for something much more violent and final. Realizing that your mother's pain has roots that go deeper than you ever imagined. I don't know how often my mom thinks about that day. I don't know what memories still surface for her when she's alone, or what dreams still find their way back. I don't know how much of her life has been shaped by that moment, consciously or unconsciously. I just know that trauma like that doesn't vanish. It settles into the background of a person's life, influencing choices, reactions, fears, and coping mechanisms in ways even they might not fully understand. When I think about it now, it's not just sad. It's unsettling, it's frightening in a quiet, existential way. It reminds me how fragile families are, how much pain can exist beneath normal appearances, and how children often grow up surrounded by truths they're not yet allowed to know. It also makes me realize how much compassion my mother deserved, even in moments when it was hard to give. I still think about how long I didn't know any of this, how much was hidden behind simple phrases and omissions, and how learning it later didn't just change how I see my mom, but how I see myself, my family, and the weight of the past we all carry, whether we know it or not. This is one of those stories that stays with you not because it's mysterious or supernatural, but because of how brutally real it is, and how helpless everyone involved was. Even a short description is enough to unsettle most people, but the full reality of what happened is far worse than any headline ever conveyed. It's the kind of event that permanently changes how you see public spaces, strangers, and the idea of safety itself. Tim McLean was a 22-year-old Canadian man. He was young, ordinary, and doing something countless people do without thinking twice. He was riding a Greyhound bus, traveling across Canada, just trying to get from one place to another. There was nothing remarkable about the moment. He was sitting in his seat, wearing headphones, asleep. Vulnerable in the way people are when they trust that a public place, surrounded by others, is inherently safe. The man sitting next to him was Vincent Lee. Without warning, without any argument or provocation, Lee produced a large knife and attacked McLean. Tim never had a chance to react. He was asleep when it began. Other passengers realized something was wrong only when they heard sounds of struggle and saw movement that didn't make sense. Panic spread quickly through the bus. The driver did the only thing he could think to do. He pulled the bus over to the side of the road and ordered everyone to get off. People fled the vehicle in shock and terror, scrambling away from what they didn't yet fully understand. A few men, including the driver, tried to intervene. They tried to help Tim, but they were met with violence and were forced back. The attacker locked himself inside the bus. What happened next unfolded in full view of the passengers standing outside on the roadside, powerless to stop it. Lee continued his attack after everyone else had fled. At one point, he displayed what he had done to the other passengers through the bus windows. People outside were screaming, crying, vomiting, some collapsing in shock. No one could help. No one could get back onto the bus without being killed themselves. All they could do was wait for police, watching something unfold that their minds couldn't fully process. Afterward, Lee remained on the bus for hours alone with the body while police surrounded the vehicle. When officers finally entered, they discovered the extent of what had occurred. Parts of Tim's body had been removed and placed in bags. Other parts were found on Lee himself. Some parts were never recovered. Even writing this in restrained language doesn't fully capture the barbarity of the crime. It was not just murder. It was a level of violence that stripped away any sense of order or humanity in the moment. People who witnessed it were left with lifelong trauma. Some required extensive psychological treatment. Some never rode buses again. Some never fully recovered. The legal aftermath disturbed people almost as much as the crime itself. Vincent Lee was diagnosed with schizophrenia and was found not criminally responsible due to mental illness. He was committed to a psychiatric facility rather than prison. Over time, doctors declared that his condition was treated. His medication was effective. He was deemed no longer a danger. Eventually, he was released. Not only released, but later allowed to live in the community without supervision, under a new name. For many people, especially Tim McLean's family, this felt like a second injustice layered on top of an unimaginable loss. A young man was killed in one of the most horrific ways possible, and the person responsible was eventually allowed to return to society. The legal system viewed it as treatment and rehabilitation. Many members of the public viewed it as something else entirely. This case ignited intense debate about mental illness, criminal responsibility, public safety, and where compassion should begin and end. On one hand, schizophrenia is a devastating illness, and people who suffer from it deserve treatment, not punishment for something they could not control. On the other hand, the sheer extremity of the crime made it almost impossible for many to accept the idea that the person responsible could ever be considered safe again. What makes this story so terrifying isn't just the violence, it's the setting. This didn't happen in an alleyway or a war zone or somewhere already associated with danger. It happened on a bus, a place people sleep, a place people relax, a place parents let their kids travel alone. It shattered the illusion that being surrounded by strangers equals safety. Tim McLean didn't take risks. He didn't provoke anyone. He didn't do anything wrong. He was simply there. That's what makes it so disturbing. It forces you to confront the idea that sometimes safety is an illusion and that randomness plays a terrifying role in who lives and who doesn't. It also forces you to grapple with uncomfortable questions about responsibility, illness, and justice that don't have clean answers. For many people, this case became one of those reference points in their mind, something they think about when they board a bus or sit next to a stranger or notice someone acting oddly in public. Not because they believe something like this will happen again, but because now they know it can. Tim McLean is remembered not just as a victim of a crime, but as a reminder of how fragile normal life can be and how quickly it can be torn apart. The brutality of what happened to him defies easy explanation, and the aftermath continues to unsettle people years later. It's not a ghost story. It's not a myth. It's not exaggerated. It's real, and that's what makes it so hard to forget. This is one of those stories that still makes my stomach drop when I think about it. Not because of gore or graphic details, but because of how close it came to ending in something unspeakable. It's the kind of thing that makes you realize how thin the line is between a normal night and something that changes everything forever. A few years ago, my sister had a friend who went on holiday to another country. It was supposed to be fun, carefree, the kind of trip young people take to relax, drink, and enjoy being away from home. One night while she was out at a bar with her friends, she started talking to a guy. Nothing about it seemed strange at first. He was friendly, charming, and as the night went on, they ended up kissing. It felt like a typical holiday encounter, the kind of thing that happens all the time when people are traveling. As the night continued, the man invited her back to his place. She didn't feel comfortable with the idea. Something about it didn't sit right with her, even if she couldn't explain why. She hesitated and said she didn't really want to go, but her friends, caught up in the moment and probably assuming everything was harmless, kept encouraging her. They told her to go, told her she was overthinking it, told her it was just part of the holiday experience. In the end, she trusted her instincts. She decided not to go with him and instead went back with her friends. At the time, it probably felt like a small decision, almost insignificant, just choosing to stay with her group instead of leaving with someone new. No dramatic confrontation, no big scene, just a quiet choice to walk away. About a week later, after she had returned home to Ireland, she started feeling unwell. She had a sore throat and felt off in a way that didn't seem like a normal cold. At first, it didn't seem serious. She went to the doctor expecting maybe antibiotics or reassurance. The doctor did some tests, but didn't immediately know what was wrong. That alone was unsettling, but she went home and waited, assuming it would be sorted out. A few days later, she got a call that changed everything. The doctor asked her to return to the hospital immediately. When she arrived, there were police outside. That's when fear really set in. She was taken inside and brought in for questioning. The police asked her strange, very specific questions. One of them asked if she had been kissing anyone recently. At that point, nothing made sense. She answered honestly, still not understanding why this had suddenly become a police matter. Then they explained. The disease she had tested positive for was extremely rare, so rare that there were very few ways to contract it. In fact, there was only one known way she could have gotten it, by consuming human flesh. She hadn't eaten anyone, obviously, but kissing someone who had could expose her to it. That's when everything came crashing together. She told them about the man she had met at the bar while on holiday, the kissing, the invitation back to his apartment, the fact that she had decided not to go. As soon as she told them, the police took it seriously, very seriously. They contacted law enforcement in the other country immediately and worked with them to track the man down. What they found confirmed everyone's worst fears. Police raided his apartment. Inside, they found human body parts stored in his refrigerator. The investigation revealed that he had been bringing young women back to his apartment. What happened to them there was beyond horrifying. He wasn't just killing them, he was eating them. The realization of how close she had come is almost impossible to fully process. If she had gone back to his place that night, encouraged by her friends and ignoring that uneasy feeling in her gut, there is a very real chance she would never have come home. She might have been another missing tourist, another face on a poster, another family left with unanswered questions. Instead, she walked away. What makes this story especially chilling is how ordinary it all started. A bar, a conversation, a kiss, an invitation, nothing that would immediately set off alarms for most people. The danger wasn't obvious. It didn't look like a horror story while it was happening. It looked like a normal night out. It was only later, through illness and sheer coincidence, that the truth came out. A sore throat led to a doctor's visit. A test led to a phone call. A phone call led to police involvement. And that chain of events exposed something truly monstrous hiding in plain sight. That's why this story sticks with me so deeply. Not because of what he did, but because of how close she came without ever knowing it at the time. A single decision, made quietly and without drama, saved her life. Trusting a feeling she couldn't explain kept her from stepping into a situation she would never have escaped. When people talk about close calls, this is what I think of. Not something you narrowly avoid while fully aware of the danger, but something you walk away from without realizing how bad it almost was. The kind of near miss you only understand in hindsight, when it's already too late to do anything except be grateful you listened to yourself. It's terrifying to think about how many people don't get that second chance, how many times someone ignores that voice inside them because they don't want to seem rude, paranoid, or dramatic. How many monsters don't look like monsters at all? That night could have ended very differently, and the fact that it didn't is the only reason this is a story about a close call instead of a tragedy. My brother was deeply involved in our church at the time. He wasn't just a regular member, he had taken on a leadership role and eventually became a missionary. Faith was always important to him, more than it ever was to me. I grew up in the same household, went to the same church, heard the same sermons, but my relationship with religion was more casual. For my brother, it was a calling. He believed he was meant to do more than just attend services on Sundays. He wanted to serve, to help, to be involved in work that he believed mattered. At one point, the church selected him for what they described as a special educational program. It wasn't something they talked about openly. In fact, it was handled with a level of secrecy that felt unusual even at the time. The program was apparently partnered with the Catholic Church and focused on the history of demonic possession and exorcisms. That alone sounded strange to me, because our church didn't usually involve itself with Catholic institutions, let alone something as heavy as exorcisms. But no one explained much, and my brother didn't volunteer details. I didn't even hear about the program directly from him at first. I found out through my girlfriend at the time. Her sister was also selected to attend alongside my brother, and that's how the information made its way to me. Even then, everything was vague. Dates weren't discussed openly, locations weren't clearly mentioned, and whenever I asked questions, the answers were always short and careful, as if they were instructed not to say too much. Looking back now, that secrecy feels more unsettling than it did back then. A few months after my brother returned from that program, he came to me and told me he would be going on a missions trip to Tijuana, Mexico. He said it casually, almost as if it were no big deal, but something about the way he said it made me uneasy. I asked if I could go along. I had been on smaller mission trips before, nothing dangerous or intense, and I didn't see why this would be any different. But he shut the idea down immediately. He told me no, flat out, and said he had a bad feeling about it. That alone was unusual. My brother was normally encouraging, especially when it came to church work. He liked involving people, liked sharing experiences. For him to say no so firmly caught me off guard. The church told our family that it would be a small mission, just a short trip, and that it wouldn't last longer than a week. They made it sound routine. Still, something didn't sit right with me. In the days leading up to their departure, I started having vivid dreams about my brother. These weren't random or symbolic dreams. They were intense and specific. In them, he was always in trouble. Sometimes he was running, sometimes he was trapped somewhere unfamiliar, and sometimes I couldn't see what was wrong, only that something bad was about to happen. I'd wake up with a heavy feeling in my chest, the kind that sticks with you long after you're awake. I told him about the dreams. I didn't want to scare him, but I felt like I needed to say something. He listened and brushed it off gently, telling me he would be fine and that I shouldn't worry. He said they would be gone and back before I knew it. I tried to accept that, but the uneasy feeling never went away. They left as planned, and almost immediately things felt off. The trip was supposed to last close to a week, but by the third day, they were already on their way back. I remember being confused when I heard about it. No one explained why they were returning so early. All we were told was that they had been put on a plane and sent home with one-way tickets bought that same day. It felt rushed, almost panicked. It wasn't until later, through my girlfriend's sister, that I began to hear what had actually happened. She was shaken when she talked about it, even weeks afterward, and it wasn't the kind of fear someone fakes easily. According to her, the trip had been organized because another church had requested help. Our congregation already had a family pastor stationed in the area, so they sent additional missionaries to assist. From the very first night, things started going wrong. Not small things, either. She said there were reports of strange activity almost immediately. Beds lifting off the ground as if pulled by unseen hands. Figures appearing in the road ahead of their vehicles, standing there just long enough to be seen clearly before vanishing the moment the car passed through where they had been. There were stories of women being struck by trucks and then standing up afterward, completely unharmed, as if nothing had happened at all. At first, they tried to explain it away. Stress, exhaustion, unfamiliar surroundings. But the events kept happening, and they escalated quickly. When they returned to the small house they were staying in, no one could sleep. The front door knob would start moving on its own, twisting and shaking as if someone were trying desperately to get inside. My brother would stand by the door, flashlight in hand, peering through the window, fully expecting to see an intruder. Every time there was no one there. This went on for all 3 nights. No rest, no peace, just constant tension. On the second day, they went out to visit people in the area as part of their mission work. That's when they encountered a young girl who, according to my girlfriend's sister, was clearly possessed. The girl spoke perfect English, fluent and clear, despite never having been to the United States. She knew every one of their names without being told. More unsettling than that, she knew exactly who among them was afraid. She singled them out with her words, looking directly at them as she spoke. They had fasted before the trip, something the church had instructed them to do. Because of that, they believed they were spiritually prepared. They prayed over the girl, and according to them, the spirit left her without much resistance. When the girl came back to herself, she began crying and told them that there was a group of local witches targeting that small area. She said they were responsible for much of what was happening. After that encounter, everyone was on edge. They decided to return to the house immediately. On the way back, in the middle of the road, a figure suddenly appeared in front of their vehicle. The driver swerved and the truck spun out. They were convinced they had hit someone. My brother jumped out with a flashlight and searched the area, calling out, looking for any sign of a body or even an injured animal. There was nothing. No blood, no marks, no person, no animal, just an empty road. That's when he told everyone to get back in the truck and head home immediately. He said this was a warning and they needed to leave as soon as possible. When they reached the house, every dog in the area started barking at the same time, all together, as if responding to something unseen. As soon as they stepped inside, the doorknobs began shaking again. Doors slammed open and shut violently. Everyone prayed together, terrified. Around the same time, back home, something else was happening. Parents began calling the main pastor, frantic and afraid. Every single one of them had experienced nightmares that night, vivid dreams about their children being in danger. My own father, who is agnostic and has never been particularly religious, had a terrible dream as well. I remember him arguing with my mother, saying he shouldn't have allowed my brother to go on that trip in the first place. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was coincidence or stress. Now I'm not so sure. That night was the breaking point. They decided not to stay another moment. They went straight to the nearest airport and booked flights home. No delays, no discussions. They just left. When my brother came back, he wasn't the same. He stepped down from his leadership role in the church shortly afterward, along with everyone else who had gone on the trip. None of them ever spoke openly about what happened. It's been 4 years since then. My brother has distanced himself from the church, but not from his faith. He believes in God more firmly now than ever before. When I ask him about that trip, he shuts down. All he ever says is that he's seen things he can't deny. He won't go into details. He won't relive it. The church never explained why they returned early or why they stopped sending missionaries to that region. Everything was quietly swept under the rug. Even now, when I think about it, I feel uneasy. The secrecy, the fear, the sudden changes in everyone involved. It all feels wrong in a way I can't fully explain. I don't know what they encountered in Mexico. I don't know what was real and what might have been influenced by fear or belief. All I know is that something happened that changed them deeply, and whatever it was, no one wants to talk about it. That alone is enough to scare me. My friend was driving with her daughter to take her back to college after a visit home. The town they were heading to was a few hundred miles away, so it was a long drive, the kind where you settle into the road and just try to get through the hours. It was supposed to be a normal trip, nothing special, nothing dangerous, just a mother and daughter talking, passing the time, and thinking about getting back to routine. Somewhere along the way, everything went wrong. To this day, neither of them remembers what actually caused the accident. There's no clear moment they can point to. No memory of swerving or braking or seeing anything in the road. The most likely guess is that my friend tried to steer around a deer or some other animal, something that happens all the time on rural highways, but neither of them can say for sure. What they do know is that it went bad very fast. The truck left the road and flipped at least once before coming to a stop. Both of them lost consciousness during the crash. They were in the middle of nowhere, far from any town or hospital. No houses nearby, no traffic passing every few minutes. If no one had come along, things could have ended very differently. Thankfully, another driver happened to come across the wreck not too long after it happened. That person stopped, saw how serious the situation was, and immediately called 911. Because of how remote the location was, emergency services made the decision to dispatch a medical helicopter. When first responders arrived, both my friend and her daughter were still unconscious, and from the way they were positioned and the damage to the vehicle, there was concern about possible spinal injuries. There was no time to debate options or compare transport methods. They needed to get to a hospital as quickly and safely as possible, and in that moment, the helicopter was the only realistic choice. Neither my friend nor her daughter had any say in this. They were unconscious. They didn't consent to anything, didn't choose a provider, didn't even know what was happening. They were loaded onto the helicopter and flown to the nearest hospital, capable of handling their injuries. Thankfully, both of them survived. After everything settled and the doctors were able to assess the damage, it turned out that things could have been much worse. My friend had fractured vertebrae, but the doctors were able to stabilize and treat them without long-term paralysis. Both she and her daughter had mild concussions, but no severe brain damage. With time, treatment, and recovery, they both healed. Physically, at least, they made full recoveries. Another important detail is that my friend had what most people would consider very good health insurance. Solid coverage, the kind you believe will protect you if something terrible happens. They assumed that, given the circumstances, the insurance would cover the emergency care. After all, this wasn't an elective procedure or a planned service. This was a life-or-death emergency in the middle of nowhere. That's when the real nightmare began. When the bills started coming in, everything changed. The medical helicopter ride alone totaled around $250,000 just for the flight. When the insurance company reviewed the claim, they refused to pay for it. Their reason was simple and devastating. The helicopter service that responded to the emergency was out of network. It didn't matter that my friend and her daughter were unconscious. It didn't matter that they had no choice. It didn't matter that refusing air transport could have resulted in paralysis or death. The insurance company flatly stated that because the helicopter provider was out of network, they would not cover the cost. There were no appeals that made a difference, no explanations that softened their stance, no acknowledgement of how absurd and cruel the situation was. According to the insurance company, the debt was valid, and it was my friend's responsibility to pay it. $250,000. That amount of money isn't something most people can just figure out how to repay. It's not a bill you tighten your budget for. It's not something you take on with a payment plan and move on. It's life-altering. For my friend and her family, it meant facing the reality that they could be in debt for the rest of their lives. The only real way out, as they were told, would be to declare bankruptcy, and doing that would likely mean losing their house, the home they worked for, built their lives in, and planned to keep, all because of an emergency medical decision made while they were unconscious and fighting for their lives. What makes this story so unsettling isn't just the accident itself. Accidents happen, people get hurt, and sometimes they're lucky enough to survive. What's truly horrifying is what came after. The realization that even when you do everything right, Even when you have insurance, even when you're the victim of circumstances completely out of your control, the system can still ruin you. They survived the crash. They survived their injuries, but they were left with something that feels just as crushing in a different way. A debt that never should have existed. A punishment for staying alive. It's the kind of story that changes how you think about safety, about security, and about the idea that help will always be there when you need it. Because sometimes the rescue comes with a price so high that it follows you long after the wounds have healed. This scared me a lot when I was younger. It doesn't affect me the same way anymore, but it's still one of those stories that never really leaves you. The kind that sits in the back of your mind and changes how a place feels forever. Even now, when I think about that house, it still feels heavy in a way I can't fully explain. My great-aunt and uncle once opened a small store that was attached directly to the house they lived in. It wasn't unusual for the time or the area. A lot of people ran family businesses like that, with the shop connected to the home. Before they opened the store, they did a lot of renovations to the property. As part of that process, they had a security system installed, not just for the store, but for the house as well. They wanted to feel safe, especially knowing there would be money, inventory, and valuable items on the property. The house itself was beautiful. It had this old, elegant feel to it, like it had history baked into the walls. My great-aunt had a serious love for grandfather clocks. She collected them, and they were everywhere in the house. Almost every room had at least one. Some were tall and ornate, others simpler, but all of them were well cared for. Even as a kid, I could tell they were worth a lot of money. Looking back now, I'm sure that collection alone was incredibly valuable. One night, long after the store had closed and everything was quiet, my great-uncle heard a noise coming from downstairs. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to wake him and make him uneasy. He didn't ignore it. He got out of bed and went downstairs to check what was going on, probably thinking it might have been a small issue or maybe even nothing at all. What he found instead was every homeowner's worst nightmare. There were people inside the house. They were being robbed. From what we were later told, my great-uncle surprised the burglars when he came downstairs. They hadn't expected anyone to confront them. Things escalated fast. One of the intruders stabbed my great-uncle 4 times. The violence of it is hard to even imagine. Hearing the noise and realizing something was terribly wrong, my great-aunt woke up and opened one of the upstairs windows. She started screaming for help as loudly as she could, hoping someone nearby would hear her. The burglars didn't run. Instead, they carried my great-uncle, who was badly injured, back upstairs. They brought him into the bedroom, tied him up on the bed, and tied my great-aunt up as well. After that, they continued robbing the house. They took what they wanted, including valuables, and then they left them there, tied up, bleeding, and terrified. Thankfully, my great-aunt's screaming had been loud enough. Neighbors heard it and called the police. When the police arrived, what they found was horrifying. The hallway was covered in blood. My great-aunt and uncle were still tied up in the bed, injured but alive. It was a miracle they survived. If help had arrived any later, the outcome could have been very different. The investigation that followed made the whole situation even more disturbing. It turned out that the men who robbed them weren't random criminals. They worked for the same company that had installed the security system in the house and store. They knew exactly how it worked. They knew how to disable it. They knew the layout of the house, where things were, and how to get in without triggering alarms. That sense of betrayal added another layer of horror to the entire event. Eventually, they were caught, but the damage had already been done. After hearing about what happened, being in that house always felt strange. Even though it was clean, repaired, and looked normal again, It never truly felt normal. There was a heaviness to it, like the walls remembered what had happened there. The clocks ticking throughout the house only made it worse. Every tick felt louder, sharper, especially when the house was quiet. For a long time, we didn't even know the full story. The adults kept it from us because we were kids. The only reason we were eventually told was because of something that happened years later. We used to play this game with our cousins where one of the uncles would chase us around in the dark to scare us. We would scream, laugh, hide, and run through the house like maniacs. It was loud, chaotic, and fun in that reckless way kids enjoy. One time we played this game at my great-aunt and uncle's house. It was the first time we had ever done it there. We were running around in the dark, screaming and laughing, completely unaware of how it might sound to people outside. The neighbors heard us and called the police, thinking something was wrong. Suddenly the police showed up. I remember running around when a cop flipped on his lights, stopping me in my tracks. I was probably breathing hard, full of adrenaline and confused. I explained that we were just playing a game and that nothing bad was happening. The officer listened and then told me to try to keep it down. He said the neighbors were worried because of what had happened in that house in the past. That was the first time we really heard about it. After that, everything about that house made sense in a horrible way. The quiet, the tension, the way the adults acted differently there. Knowing what had happened made every visit feel different. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a place where something truly violent and terrifying had occurred. And even though time had passed, it felt like the echo of that night never fully went away. Even now, I don't scare easily when I think about it. But I'll never forget how that story changed the way that house felt forever, and how sometimes the scariest places aren't haunted by ghosts, but by things that actually happened inside them. A lot of these things happened over many years, but when I look back on them now, they all blur together into this long stretch of life, where tragedy seemed to keep showing up again and again. None of them felt distant at the time. Even when I didn't know the people personally, they happened close enough or were talked about enough that they felt like they brushed up against my own life. As a kid and teenager, I didn't really have the emotional tools to process any of it properly. I just absorbed it all, and it left a mark. One of the earliest stories that really stuck with me wasn't something that happened while I was a student, but something we were told about a teacher at my high school. Back in the 1980s, before I was born, she had been attending the local university. She was a health teacher, someone whose job was literally to teach people about safety, wellness, and taking care of themselves. While she was jogging one day, she was kidnapped. Another student had gone missing the week before, and there had been warnings going around. But for whatever reason, she didn't heed them. What happened to her was horrifying. She was raped, and during the ordeal, the man showed her where he had dumped the body of the student who had gone missing earlier. At some point, he stopped for gas. In a moment that probably saved her life and countless others, she jumped out of his vehicle and into another car, begging the man inside to drive away and call the police. He did. She survived, and because of her escape and testimony, the man was caught. People later said she likely prevented what could have turned into a much larger killing and raping spree. That story alone was terrifying, but what made it worse was how it ended. Years later, while I was actually attending that high school, she came down with pneumonia. It developed into septic shock, and she died. I remember how shaken I felt by that. It felt unfair in a way that was hard to put into words. Someone who had survived something so brutal, someone who had been so strong, died from something that felt so ordinary and random. Around the same time, my brother also had pneumonia. He survived, thankfully, but the timing made everything feel fragile. like life could turn at any moment for reasons completely outside your control. My freshman year of high school brought another kind of shock. One of the football players at my school shot himself. I didn't know him well, but he was someone I recognized, someone I had seen in the halls, at games, around campus. It was probably my first truly close experience with suicide. Not something on the news, not a distant story, but something that happened to someone my age, in my environment. It rattled me more than I realized at the time. Later in my high school years, there was another suicide. A special needs student took his own life. What disturbed me almost as much as the death itself was the response to it. It didn't receive nearly the same attention or care from the school or the community. The contrast was stark and uncomfortable. It planted an early awareness in me about whose lives people seemed to value more, whose deaths were mourned publicly, and whose were quietly moved past. Then came a year that felt especially heavy. I believe it was 2014 or 2015. In that single year, at least a dozen students at the local university died from various causes. The first death, and the one people talked about the most, was a young sophomore. She hung herself using her hammock in the woods just beyond the university perimeter. She was missing for over a week. No one knew where she was. Eventually, a nearby resident reported a persistent smell, and that's how she was found. Even writing that now makes my stomach tighten. The idea of someone being missing, suffering alone, and then being discovered that way haunted a lot of people. That wasn't the only suicide that year. Someone else hung themselves in a shower in one of the dorms. There were several other suicides that people referred to in a disturbingly casual way, calling them run-of-the-mill, as if repetition had dulled the horror. There were also drug overdoses, lives ending quietly in dorm rooms or apartments, sometimes not discovered until it was too late. One student was found dead in a creek. The cause of death was never clearly explained, at least not publicly. Another student was killed in a head-on collision in town. His family still maintains a cross at the site of the crash. It's decorated and cared for, a permanent reminder on the side of the road. Every time you pass it, you're reminded that someone died there, that someone's life ended suddenly, violently, and too soon. While I was still in school, another tragedy struck closer to home. A fellow student was crushed to death when the pickup truck he was riding in rolled over. It was sudden, violent, and completely unexpected. Accidents like that have a way of making you realize how little control anyone really has, even during ordinary moments. There was also an incident involving an elderly couple who died together in a hotel room. At first, it was chalked up to a sad coincidence. Two people, married for years, passing away close together. It sounded tragic but almost peaceful in the way people framed it. A few months later, the truth came out. A boy and his mother became very ill after staying in the same room. The boy died. An investigation revealed that a vent under the room had been improperly repaired using cheap tape and propped up with an old VHS tape. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Negligence, preventable. The hotel later changed brand names, but the room itself remains sealed shut. Knowing that people unknowingly slept in a room that dangerous, and that a child died because of it, added another layer of anger to the sadness. Another story that never left me involved a little boy during a big thunderstorm. He fell into a culvert that led to an underground stream. He didn't survive. His body was later recovered in full view of a Wendy's drive-thru. That detail stuck with people, maybe because of how surreal it was. Normal life continuing, people ordering food, cars lining up, while something so horrific was happening right there. Tragedy seemed to follow my brother's social circle as well. One of his high school friends was killed in a car crash. His vehicle left the roadway and became tangled in a grove of trees. The car wasn't found for many hours. His 12-year-old brother was in the vehicle with him, trapped inside, alive and conscious, with the body of his older brother the entire time. The psychological weight of that is almost impossible to imagine. Even thinking about it makes my chest feel tight. Another friend of my brother lost her mother in a head-on collision. It happened on the same turn where my friend's grandmother had rolled her truck earlier, though she survived. In that same general circle of people, another friend was thrown from a vehicle in a drunk driving accident and was paralyzed. It felt like that one stretch of road held too many stories, too much pain, like the land itself was marked by loss. There was also a drunk girl leaving a party who ran over two people. The cruel irony was that the two victims had been making the responsible choice. They were walking home from the same party instead of driving. One of them was killed. That story made a lot of people angry in a deep, lasting way. Doing the right thing didn't save them. Most recently, and maybe most disturbing of all, a student at my former high school killed both of his parents. He laid their bodies out in the yard and fled town. He was later apprehended in Tennessee. Reports said he showed little remorse. That story felt like something out of a nightmare, the kind of thing you never expect to be connected to a place you once walked through every day. When I sit and think about all of this together, it feels overwhelming. Individually, each story is tragic enough. Together, they form this backdrop of constant loss, violence, accidents, and death that shaped how I see the world. As a kid and teenager, I didn't always consciously process these events. I just lived alongside them, absorbing the fear, the sadness, the disbelief. There are probably more stories I'm forgetting. Moments that didn't come to mind while brainstorming, names and faces that have blurred with time. But even this list alone feels heavy. It explains a lot about why I became so aware, so cautious, and sometimes so numb. When death and tragedy show up again and again, they stop feeling rare. They start feeling possible everywhere, all the time. Looking back now, I can see how deeply all of this affected me, even if I didn't understand it back then. These weren't just stories. They were reminders, repeated over years, that life can change in an instant, that safety is fragile, and that sometimes there is no meaning or fairness to what happens. It's a lot to carry, especially when you grow up surrounded by it. Sorry to interrupt. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Shadow Archives for daily true horror content that will haunt your dreams and keep you wondering what lurks in the shadows. And don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story when the darkness calls out to you. I live in Southern California, about 30 minutes from the border, in an area that most people would probably consider normal and familiar. It's the kind of place where you have big chain stores, busy parking lots, and people going about their daily routines. For a while, there had been warnings circulating online and through word of mouth about attempted abductions of girls in parking lots at places like Walmart, Vons, and other grocery stores. From what I knew, no one had officially gone missing, and because of that, I didn't take the warnings as seriously as I should have. I've always been someone who runs errands alone. I actually preferred going to Walmart late at night because there were fewer people, shorter lines, and less noise. It felt calmer, easier. I never thought of myself as careless, just independent. I didn't think something like that would happen to me. Those stories always felt like something that happened to other people, not in my everyday life. One night, I went to Walmart like I had many times before. It was late, the store wasn't crowded, and everything felt normal. I did my shopping, paid, and walked out with my bags in my hands. The parking lot was dimly lit in that way big parking lots usually are at night. You can see well enough, but there are plenty of shadows, plenty of spaces where someone could stand without drawing attention. As I walked toward my car, I noticed a man standing on one of the little islands in the parking lot. the kind with a tree planted in the middle. He was only about 2 cars away from mine. He had a cap on and was holding a cell phone, like he was texting or pretending to be on a call. At first, I didn't think much of it. People stand around parking lots all the time, checking their phones, waiting for rides, or just killing time. But then something clicked. I had parked my car a little farther out, and as I got closer to it, I noticed the man move. He took a few steps closer in the direction of my car. It wasn't dramatic or rushed, but it was enough to set off something deep in my gut. It felt wrong. The timing was too perfect. The closer I got to my car, the closer he seemed to get too. That uneasy feeling hit me all at once. I remember thinking that something about the situation didn't add up. My heart started beating faster, and I became very aware of how quiet the parking lot felt. I was holding my bags, my keys were in my hand, and suddenly I felt exposed in a way I hadn't before. Instead of continuing to my car, I forced myself to stay calm and act normal. I stopped walking, looked down into my bag like I had forgotten something, and then casually turned around and walked back toward the store. I tried not to look panicked. I tried not to run. I just acted like I had made a simple mistake. Once I was back inside the store, I stood near the entrance and watched through the glass doors. From there, I could see the man clearly. After a moment, he got into a car and started driving around the parking lot. What stood out to me was that he didn't leave. He just circled, slowly, like he was looking for something, or someone. At that point, I knew I wasn't imagining things. I didn't want to go back out there alone. I looked around and saw the employee who usually stands by the door checking receipts. I walked up to him and asked if he could walk me to my car. I tried to sound calm, but I'm sure my voice gave me away. He didn't hesitate at all. He immediately said yes, like he understood exactly why I was asking. Walking back out with him felt completely different. The parking lot didn't feel as threatening anymore, not because it had changed, but because I wasn't alone. We walked to my car and I kept scanning around, half expecting to see the man again. I got into my car, thanked the employee, locked my doors, and started the engine. I didn't sit there. I didn't check my phone. I drove off immediately. It wasn't until I was safely away that everything really hit me. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. My chest felt tight. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the way the man had moved closer, the way he circled the parking lot afterward. The more I thought about it, the more obvious it seemed that this hadn't been random. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went online and started looking at Facebook posts and community groups where people talked about local incidents. What I found made my stomach drop. There were post after post from women describing experiences that were almost identical to mine. Same kinds of parking lots, same behavior. A man standing nearby, pretending to be on his phone, moving closer as they approached their cars. Sometimes different cars, sometimes different locations, but the tactics were the same. Some of the descriptions of the men were eerily similar too. Hats pulled low, phones in hand, acting casual, waiting, watching. Reading those posts made it clear that this wasn't just a random creep or an isolated incident. This was organized, planned, repeated. The kind of thing that only works because it blends into normal life so well. A man standing in a parking lot doesn't automatically look dangerous. A car driving around doesn't automatically raise alarms. That's what makes it so terrifying. Living so close to the border adds another layer of fear. Once someone is taken across it, tracking them becomes incredibly difficult. The thought of that still makes my stomach twist. The idea that someone could disappear so quickly, so quietly, without anyone realizing what had happened until it was far too late, is horrifying. Looking back, I realize how close I came to something much worse. If I hadn't trusted that gut feeling, if I hadn't turned around, if I hadn't asked for help, Any one of those things could have changed the outcome. It scares me to think about how many times people ignore that feeling because they don't want to seem rude, paranoid, or dramatic. After that night, everything changed for me. I don't go to stores alone late at night anymore. I don't brush off warnings the way I used to. I pay attention to my surroundings in a way I didn't before. That sense of safety I used to have, the belief that I could just exist without thinking too much about danger, is gone. What stays with me the most is how normal it all felt at first. I wasn't doing anything risky. I wasn't in a bad area. I was just grocery shopping. That's what makes it so unsettling. These things don't always happen in dark alleys or abandoned places. Sometimes they happen in well-lit parking lots, right outside busy stores, while people are just trying to live their lives. I know now how important it is to listen to that instinct, that quiet voice that tells you something isn't right, even when you can't explain why. That night taught me that being cautious isn't being paranoid. It's being aware, and that awareness might be the only thing standing between you and something you can't come back from. I still think about that man sometimes. I wonder how many times he tried the same thing. I wonder how many people didn't make it back to their cars safely. And I think about how easily it could have been me if I had taken just a few more steps forward instead of turning around. There are some very large houses deep in the woods where I grew up. The kind of places that sit far back from the road, with long gravel driveways, tall trees on both sides, and heavy iron gates at the entrance. These weren't normal suburban homes. They belonged to people who wanted privacy, people with money, people who liked being hidden away from everyone else. As a kid, I always thought those houses looked impressive during the day, but at night they felt different. The woods swallowed the light, and the gates looked less like protection and more like barriers meant to keep something trapped inside. One of those houses belonged to a man who was known around town but not very well liked. He kept to himself, had a reputation for partying too hard, and rarely interacted with neighbors. One night, he went out drinking with some friends, the kind of night where one drink turns into many and time stops feeling real. By the time he made his way back toward home, he was exhausted, unsteady, and not thinking clearly. When he finally reached the entrance to his property, he realized something that should have been minor but turned into a nightmare. He didn't have the key to the gate. Normally that wouldn't have been a problem. He could have called his wife to open it remotely from inside the house, or even slept it off in his car until morning. But alcohol doesn't encourage smart decisions. Instead of stopping to think, he decided he would just climb over the gate. The gate itself was tall, made of thick iron bars with sharp spikes at the top. It wasn't decorative in a friendly way. It was designed to keep people out, and it did its job well. In his drunken state, he grabbed onto the bars and started pulling himself up, ignoring how slippery his hands felt or how poorly balanced he was. Halfway over, his foot slipped. His weight shifted suddenly, and before he could react, his leg came down hard onto one of the spikes. The pain must have been immediate and overwhelming. The spike pierced straight through his leg, pinning him in place. His body dropped, and the full weight of him pulled against the metal. He wasn't standing anymore. He was hanging there, suspended by his own injury, unable to climb forward or pull himself back. Any movement sent a wave of pain through his body that probably made his vision blur. In that moment, he could have screamed. He could have called out for help. His wife was inside the house, asleep only a short distance away. But fear stopped him. He knew that the gate was automatic, designed to slide open sideways when activated from inside. If his wife woke up and opened it without seeing him, the movement would drag his leg along the spike. In his mind, that meant one thing. It would tear his leg apart. So instead of yelling, instead of calling for help, he stayed silent. and that's how he remained for the entire night. The woods around him were quiet at first, the way they always are, late at night. Then the sounds began. Insects, distant animals, the wind moving through the trees. Every noise probably felt amplified. He was stuck, injured, drunk, and alone, hanging from his own gate. Time must have slowed to a crawl. Minutes would have felt like hours. Every muscle in his body would have started to cramp as he tried to hold himself up, just enough to keep from putting more pressure on the wound. As the alcohol wore off, the pain would have become sharper, more focused. His leg was pierced, blood soaking into his pants, dripping down onto the ground below. The spike was cold and unforgiving, holding him there like a hook. His arms would have begun to shake from exhaustion. He couldn't sit, he couldn't stand, he couldn't lie down. All he could do was hang there, waiting for morning, hoping he wouldn't pass out. Passing out was probably his greatest fear. If he lost consciousness, his body would go limp. The full weight of him would pull down on that spike, tearing into his leg even more. He might bleed out. He might shock his system beyond recovery. So he forced himself to stay awake. He focused on breathing, on staying still, on surviving one moment at a time. The night air would have grown colder as the hours passed. His sweat would have chilled against his skin. His teeth might have chattered. Every so often, a sound from the woods might have made his heart race, even though he was trapped and couldn't escape anything anyway. The gate creaked slightly under his weight. The iron pressed into his hands and arms. The smell of blood mixed with dirt and metal filled his nose. Inside the house, his wife slept peacefully, unaware that her husband was just beyond the gate, suffering in silence. The contrast is unsettling. Warm bed, quiet house, and just outside, pain and fear hanging in the dark. If he had called out, she would have woken up. But fear of losing his leg kept him quiet. That decision locked him into hours of agony. By the time the sky began to lighten, his body would have been completely exhausted. His arms numb, his leg burning, his head pounding. He had survived the night, but barely. When his wife finally woke up in the morning and looked outside, she saw something she never could have imagined. Her husband hanging from the gate, bloodied, pale, barely holding on. She screamed and immediately called for help. Emergency services arrived quickly, including the fire department. My dad was one of the firefighters who responded to the call. He didn't talk about it often, but when he did, you could tell the image stuck with him. The man was still conscious when they arrived, but barely. His leg was firmly impaled. There was no simple way to remove him. They couldn't lift him off without causing more damage. Pulling him back the way he came would have torn his leg even further, so they made the only choice they had. They cut the gate itself. My dad said they had to saw off the spike that was holding him there. The sound of metal being cut. The tension of every movement, the man trying not to scream as they worked carefully to free him. Eventually, they got him down and rushed him to the hospital. Physically, he survived. His leg was badly injured, but it wasn't lost. He healed over time. But the story never really left the town. People talked about it quietly, shaking their heads, imagining what it must have been like. Hanging there all night, afraid to ask for help. Trapped by your own choices. What makes the story unsettling isn't just the injury, it's the silence, the idea of being so close to safety, so close to help, and choosing not to call out because the risk feels worse than the pain you're already in. It's imagining the hours passing while your body weakens, the darkness pressing in, and knowing that every second is your own responsibility to survive. Even now, when I picture it, I can't help but feel uneasy, not because of anything supernatural, but because it highlights how fragile people really are, how quickly a normal night can turn into something horrifying. Just imagine hanging from your own gate, surrounded by woods, listening to the night pass by, knowing that help is just a few steps away, but being too afraid to reach for it. That thought alone is enough to make my skin crawl. This one didn't happen to a friend or a friend of a friend. This happened to me, and even now, years later, I still don't like thinking about that house too much. At the time, I tried to explain things away, tried to stay calm and rational, but there were moments in that place that made my stomach drop in a way I can't really describe. It wasn't constant terror. It was more like a slow, creeping realization that something about that house wasn't right, and that it noticed us noticing it. We moved to Wisconsin when I was still pretty young. The house wasn't deep in the middle of nowhere, but it also wasn't in town. It sat in what people there call the county, just outside the limits, where the roads get quieter and the properties spread out a bit more. There were trees around, patches of open land, and neighbors close enough to see, but far enough away that you didn't feel crowded. During the day, it seemed peaceful. At night, it felt isolated in a way that was hard to put into words. When we first moved in, we did what most people do. We met the neighbors, introduced ourselves, asked a few casual questions about the area and the house. At some point, the conversation turned to the people who had lived there before us. That's when things got a little strange. One of the neighbors smiled in a polite but uncomfortable way and said the family had been nice enough, but then paused before adding that the mother was interesting. The way they said it made it clear that interesting wasn't meant in a good way. As we talked more, bits and pieces came out. Apparently, every bedroom door in the house had been replaced shortly before the family moved out. The reason, according to the neighbors, was that the mother had installed locks on the outside of all the children's bedroom doors. Not child-proof locks, real locks. The kind you'd expect on a front door, but facing outward. The idea of that alone made my skin crawl, even though at the time I didn't fully understand why. There was also the basement. The house had one, but it didn't have any windows at all, not even small ones near the ceiling. It looked like it had been completely redone at some point. Newer than the rest of the house, cleaner, almost too clean. No one outright said anything bad happened down there, but no one had to. The implication hung in the air, and after that conversation, I found myself thinking about it more than I wanted to. At first, nothing seemed wrong. We unpacked, settled in, and started living our normal lives. A couple of months passed before we noticed anything unusual, and even then it started small. My father and I began noticing that whenever we set glasses on the counters, they would tip over or fall off entirely. At first, it felt silly to even mention it. Counters aren't always level. People bump into things. Gravity exists. We laughed it off and assumed we just weren't paying attention. But it kept happening. We'd carefully place a glass near the center of the counter, walk away, and hear it clatter to the floor moments later. Sometimes it tipped. Sometimes it slid. Sometimes it looked like it had been pushed. We started being extra careful, deliberately placing things farther from the edge, checking the surface with our hands. Still, it happened. Over and over again. It wasn't dramatic, just persistent enough to be irritating and confusing. Then came the knocking. The first time it happened, it was late at night. I was in my room, lying in bed, just starting to drift off, when I heard a knock on my door. It wasn't loud or aggressive, just a normal knock, the kind my father would use if he needed something. Half asleep, I called out, asking what he wanted. There was no response. I waited a few seconds, then got up and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The house was quiet. I stood there for a moment, feeling slightly foolish, then went back to bed. A few minutes later, my father stepped out of his room and asked why I had knocked on his door. I told him I hadn't. I explained that I only got up because I thought he had knocked on mine. We both stood there, looking at each other, trying to make sense of it. Neither of us felt particularly scared at that moment. It was more confusing than anything. Eventually, we shrugged it off and went back to our rooms. After that, things started happening more often. Small things at first, the kind of things you might question yourself over. I would catch shadows moving in my closet when nothing else in the room was shifting. I'd look again, and everything would be still. Branches would be left on our doorstep, not blown there by the wind, but placed neatly, almost intentionally. We'd find them in the morning, and no one could explain how they got there. By that point, I had more or less accepted the idea that the house might be haunted. It sounds ridiculous to say that so casually, but when you live with strange things long enough, your brain adjusts. It becomes part of the background. You don't panic over every noise. You just stay alert. My little sister slept through everything. Nothing ever seemed to bother her. She could sleep through storms, loud noises, anything. If the house was paying attention to us, it didn't seem interested in her. One night, my parents were gone, and I was home alone with my sister. She was already asleep, and I was in my room, lying in bed, trying to rest. I heard the knocking again, same as before, calm, steady, on my bedroom door. I ignored it. I told myself it wasn't worth engaging with. A few moments later, it happened again, louder this time. I still ignored it. Then everything changed. Suddenly, it sounded like every wall in my room was being hit at once. Not just knocked on, but slammed, over and over again. The noise was chaotic and overwhelming, like a group of gorillas beating on the walls from all sides. My paintings started shaking, on their hooks rattling violently. Some of them bounced as if they were about to fall. The bed vibrated. The sound filled the room so completely that it felt like it was inside my head. Fear flashed through me, sharp and sudden, but it was immediately replaced by anger. I don't know where that came from. Maybe adrenaline, maybe exhaustion, maybe something in me just snapped. Without really thinking about it, I yelled out loud, telling whatever it was to knock it off. I swore at it, told it I was trying to sleep, told it I wasn't scared, told it to shut up. The moment the words left my mouth, everything stopped. Instant silence, no fading, no last knock. Just complete unnatural quiet. My heart was pounding, and I lay there listening, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The house went back to being still, as if nothing had happened at all. The next day, I told my father what happened. He listened calmly, without interrupting, and when I finished, he shrugged. He said that if there were ghosts, they couldn't really do much besides scare you. He didn't seem concerned. There was a reason for that. Before all of this, before we moved there, he had been an exorcist. Not the movie kind, but someone who had dealt with things most people don't want to believe exist. Compared to what he had seen before, this was nothing. That didn't make me feel better. If anything, it made me feel worse. There were other strange moments too, things that felt almost playful, or maybe mocking. One winter we were walking home and a snowball came flying toward us from behind. It wasn't thrown hard, but it was deliberate. We turned around, expecting to see a kid or a neighbor. There was no one there. The street was empty, no footprints, no explanation. Over time, the activity faded, or maybe we just stopped reacting to it. Eventually, we moved away. I didn't realize how tense I had been living there until we were gone. Only then did I start sleeping more, easily, breathing more deeply, feeling like the walls around me were just walls again. Even now, when I think back on that house, what unsettles me the most isn't any single event. It's the feeling that something was aware of us, that it listened, that when I finally spoke back, it listened then too, and it stopped. My freshman year of college is something I usually remember in pieces. New independence, long hallways that all looked the same, late nights, and the strange mix of excitement and exhaustion that comes with living in a dorm for the first time. At the time, nothing about that year felt especially dark or dangerous. If anything, it felt routine. Looking back now, that's what makes this story so unsettling. What happened didn't announce itself with screams or alarms. It crept in slowly, quietly, through something as simple and easy to ignore as a smell. I lived on campus in one of the older dorm buildings. It was tall, narrow, and built in a way that made every floor feel like a long tunnel. The second floor was where I spent most of my time. My boyfriend lived at the very end of the hall, so every day I walked the full length of it to see him. It became a habit. I could probably have walked that hallway blindfolded. I knew where the lights flickered slightly, where the carpet dipped, which doors slammed louder than others. It was familiar and safe, or at least I thought it was. One afternoon, while walking down the hall like I had done countless times before, I noticed a smell. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but distinct enough that it made me wrinkle my nose. It wasn't the usual dorm smells like old food, trash, or mildew. This was different. It was sharp and metallic, almost coppery. At the time, I couldn't quite place it, and because it wasn't overwhelming, I ignored it and kept walking. Over the next few days, I noticed it again and again, always in the same spot. About 3 or 4 rooms down from my boyfriend's room, the smell lingered in the air. It didn't move. It didn't fade. It just hovered there, as if it belonged to that specific section of the hallway. Each time I passed through, it seemed a little stronger. Still, I told myself it had to be something harmless. Maybe a spill. Maybe someone hadn't taken their trash out. Dorms were full of weird smells, and no one ever questioned them too deeply. By the end of that first week, the smell was impossible to ignore. It had grown heavier, thicker, almost sticky in the back of my throat. It made my stomach turn slightly if I breathed too deeply. I started pointing it out to my boyfriend, and soon it became a running joke between us. Every time we walked past that area of the hall, one of us would comment on it. We'd laugh and exaggerate how gross it was, covering our noses and making dramatic faces. Humor was easier than discomfort, and neither of us seriously considered that something was actually wrong. As the days went on, the smell didn't just stay the same. It intensified. It seeped into the carpet, into the walls, into the air itself. It was no longer something you noticed only if you paid attention. It hit you the moment you reached that part of the hall. Other students started commenting on it too. Some complained to each other, some shrugged it off, and some joked about a dead animal in the vents. No one seemed alarmed enough to report it. About a week and a half after I first noticed the smell, everything changed. One morning, the hallway was chaotic in a way I had never seen before. Maintenance workers were moving quickly, hauling equipment, talking in low, urgent voices. Water had started flooding the area directly beneath that room. The ceiling below was dripping steadily, and parts of the hallway floor were wet. People were standing around whispering, confused and annoyed, wondering how something like that could happen. At first, I assumed it was just a plumbing issue. Old buildings have problems. Pipes burst, toilets overflow. It was inconvenient, but nothing more. That's what I thought until I saw the expressions on the faces of the maintenance workers when they came out of that room. They didn't look annoyed or frustrated. They looked shaken. Word spread quickly, as it always does in dorms, even when administrators try to keep things quiet. Someone overheard something they weren't supposed to. Someone else saw something through a partially open door. The details trickled out slowly at first, distorted and incomplete, but horrifying even in fragments. The single occupant of that room had been capturing small animals. No one knew exactly how long it had been happening. Days, maybe weeks. He had been trapping small animals, killing them inside the dorm room and using their blood to write messages on the walls and bathroom mirror. The writing wasn't random scribbles. It was deliberate, repeated, obsessive. words and symbols referencing evil and Satan, scrawled in dark, drying streaks that had soaked into the paint and glass. The smell suddenly made sense in the most awful way possible. After killing the animals, he attempted to flush their carcasses down the toilet, over and over again. That's what caused the flooding. The plumbing couldn't handle it, and eventually it backed up and burst, sending water and filth down into the floor below. That failure was the only reason anyone discovered what was happening in that room. When maintenance walked in, they weren't prepared for what they found. The room wasn't just messy or dirty. It was something else entirely. The walls, the mirror, the bathroom. Everything had been altered, stained, turned into something grotesque. The air inside was thick and overwhelming. It wasn't just the smell of decay. It was the smell of blood, metal, rot, and something deeply wrong. Campus police were called immediately. The student was removed from the dorm and taken to a psychiatric hospital. After that, the school moved fast. Too fast. Within days, the room was sealed off. It was fumigated, stripped, and completely redone. New carpet, new walls, new fixtures. It was as if they were trying to erase the fact that it had ever happened at all. Administrators sent out vague emails about a maintenance issue and reassured students that there was no danger. They didn't mention animals. They didn't mention blood. They didn't mention the writing. Officially, nothing unusual had happened. Unofficially, everyone knew something terrible had taken place. One student managed to get photos and video before everything was cleaned up. No one knows exactly how. Maybe they were friends with someone on the maintenance crew. Maybe they were just in the right place at the wrong time. Those images started to circulate quietly, passed from phone to phone in hushed conversations. I never saw them myself, but I heard enough descriptions to know I didn't want to. The administration found out quickly. That student was cornered, pressured, and forced to delete everything. The images vanished as if they had never existed. Anyone who talked too openly about what happened was warned to stop spreading rumors. The message was clear. Forget this. Move on. But it wasn't that easy. The room number became a whispered detail. Room 213. People avoided walking past it, even after it was reopened. Some students refused to live near it. Others claimed the smell never fully went away, that on certain days, if the air was right, you could still catch a faint trace of copper lingering in the hallway. I walked past that door countless times after everything happened. Every time I felt a tightening in my chest. The hallway looked the same. The carpet was clean. The walls were freshly painted. But knowing what had happened there changed everything. It was impossible to look at it as just another dorm room. What unsettled me most wasn't just the act itself, horrific as it was. It was how easily it went unnoticed. How something so disturbing could exist right next to normal college life. Students studying, laughing, living their lives, completely unaware that a few doors down, something deeply wrong was unfolding behind a closed door. Even now, years later, I still get chills thinking about it. The smell I ignored, the jokes we made, the way the school tried to erase it all. Sometimes I think about how close we all were to something truly dangerous, and how it was only discovered because a toilet backed up at the wrong moment. Whenever I smell something metallic or coppery now, my mind goes right back to that hallway, to room 213, to the idea that evil doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it just lingers in the air, waiting for someone to notice. This story happened to a very close friend of mine, or at least that is what he claims. It took place several years ago, but despite the time that has passed, he has never changed a single detail of his story. He still swears by its truthfulness to this day. Of course, just because someone believes something happened does not necessarily make it true. People can imagine things, especially when they are tired or scared, but I will say this. The sound of terror in his voice was palpable when he called me that night. I have known this guy for a long time, and he is not the type to get scared easily. He is the kind of guy who laughs at horror movies and makes fun of ghost stories. But on the night of the incident, he was not laughing. He was shaking, and I could hear the fear in his breath over the phone line. At the time, my friend was working a late shift at a gas station on the edge of town. It was a boring job, mostly stocking shelves and selling cigarettes to the occasional night owl. His shift usually ended late, around 11 o'clock at night, or sometimes closer to midnight. It was a lonely time to be working, and by the time he clocked out, the rest of the world seemed to be asleep. The night this happened, the weather was terrible. It wasn't raining, but it was incredibly foggy. This gas station was located about a 10 or 15-minute drive from my friend's house. He lived out in the country, near a small lake. Because of the water nearby, fog was a common occurrence, but on this particular night, it was thicker than usual. It was the kind of heavy, soup-like fog that swallows up streetlights and turns the world into a gray, featureless void. His entire ride home from work consisted of driving down dark back roads. These were not well-lit highways with wide shoulders. These were narrow, winding country lanes where the trees grew close to the pavement and there were no street lamps for miles. At that time of night, it was extremely rare to pass another car. It was just him, his headlights, and the empty road. He finished his work, locked up the store, and got into his car. He was tired and just wanted to get home to his warm bed. As I mentioned, the fog was rolling off the lake in thick waves. His visibility was minimal. He told me later that he could barely see a few yards in front of his bumper. The high beams of his car didn't help. They just reflected off the white wall of mist, making it even harder to see. It was like driving inside a cloud. Now, my friend has always been a bit of a crazy driver. He is impatient and confident, perhaps a little too confident behind the wheel. Even though the conditions were dangerous and he couldn't see much, he was traveling much faster than he should have been. He knew these roads like the back of his hand, or so he thought. He cranked up his radio to stay awake and pressed down on the gas pedal, speeding through the gray tunnel of fog. As he was driving, winding through the curves near the lake, he started to get a bad feeling. He said the car felt light, almost floaty. He was driving too fast on the damp pavement, and he started to feel that he was losing control of the vehicle. It wasn't a skid exactly, but that terrifying sensation that the tires aren't gripping the road as tightly as they should. He gripped the steering wheel harder, his knuckles turning white, trying to keep the car centered in the lane. And then he saw something strange. He was coming up on a stretch of road where there were a few scattered houses set back from the street. Because of the fog, he couldn't see the houses themselves, just the vague shapes of driveways and mailboxes as they flashed by in his headlights. On the right side of the road, there was an old mailbox standing at the end of a driveway. The house behind it was completely dark, just a black shape in the mist. But sitting directly under the mailbox was a person. My friend slammed on his brakes instinctively, slowing down as his headlights swept over the figure. He said the person looked very ghostly. He was careful when he told me this part. He never actually used the word ghost. He didn't say it was a spirit or a demon. He just said it was ghostly looking. I have always inferred this to mean that the person was incredibly pale. He described the skin as bone white, glowing faintly in the gloom of the fog. The figure looked thin, frail, and almost skeletal. If my memory serves me correctly, he said that it looked like an older woman. She was sitting on the ground, or perhaps on a small rock, right at the edge of the road, underneath the wooden post of the mailbox. She was wearing light-colored clothing, maybe a nightgown or a pale dress, which blended in with the fog but stood out against the dark grass. As his car approached, slowing down but not stopping, the figure moved. This person, whoever it was, lifted her head. She stared directly at him. He said her eyes seemed to lock onto his, even through the glare of the headlights and the windshield. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a piercing, intense stare that went right through him. Then she moved her arms. She reached out her hands towards his vehicle. It wasn't a wave for help. It wasn't a thumb out for a hitchhike. It was a grasping motion. She reached out with both hands, fingers spread wide, as if she was trying to grab the car itself as it passed by. Her arms looked impossibly long and thin in the headlights. My friend panicked. The rational part of his brain shut down. He didn't think to stop and ask if she needed help. The vibe coming off this figure was pure wrongness. It was terrifying. He slammed his foot back onto the gas pedal. The car engine roared, the tires spun for a second on the damp asphalt, and then he shot forward, speeding past the mailbox and the pale figure. He said that as he passed her, he felt a sudden, intense chill in the car. He felt very unnerved, a deep sense of dread settling in his stomach. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. He was too afraid of what he might see. He was terrified that he would see her chasing the car, or worse, that he would look in the mirror and see her sitting in the back seat. The rest of the drive home was a blur of fear. He drove faster than ever, risking the curves and the fog, desperate to get to the safety of his house. He turned the radio off, the silence of the car suddenly feeling heavy and oppressive. Every shadow that flickered past the window looked like a reaching hand. Every patch of fog looked like a face. Finally, he saw the familiar lights of his own driveway. He pulled in, tires crunching on the gravel, and parked the car closer to the front door than usual. He turned off the engine, and the sudden silence of the night rushed back in. He sat there for a moment, breathing heavy, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. He told himself he was being ridiculous. It was probably just a confused old lady, maybe someone with dementia who had wandered out of her house. He tried to rationalize it. He unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the car door. The dome light flickered on, illuminating the interior of the car. He stepped out onto the driveway, the cool night air hitting his face. He felt a wave of relief. He was home. He was safe. He walked around the back of the car to head toward the front door of his house. As he passed the passenger side of the vehicle, the side that had been facing the mailbox and the figure, something caught his eye. The street lamp from his driveway cast a glow over the car. On the rear passenger window there was a smudge. He stopped. He leaned in closer to look. His heart stopped in his chest. There, clearly visible on the glass, were two handprints. They were not smudges from the fog. They were distinct, clear prints. They looked like they had been made by hands that were covered in a fine gray dust, or perhaps just the oil from skin. But the placement was what terrified him. The handprints were dragged. It looked as if someone had slapped their hands against the glass as the car moved past and tried to hold on. The fingers were long and thin. The prints were small, like the hands of a woman or a child. He stood there in his driveway, staring at the window. He knew for a fact that those prints had not been there when he left work. He washed his car regularly. He was proud of it. The windows had been clean, and he hadn't stopped anywhere. He hadn't picked anyone up. He hadn't rolled down the window. The only time anything had been close to that side of the car was when he passed the old woman under the mailbox, but he had been driving fast. He had been moving at 40 or 50 miles per hour when he passed her. For her to leave handprints, she would have had to reach out and touch the car with impossible speed. She would have had to make contact with a moving vehicle without breaking her wrists. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The figure hadn't just reached out. She had touched him. She had touched the car. He didn't stay to examine them any longer. Needless to say, he darted inside his house as quickly as possible. He fumbled with his keys, unlocked the door, and slammed it shut behind him. He locked the deadbolt. He locked the chain. He turned on every single light in the house. He went to the window and peered out through the curtains. half expecting to see the pale figure standing in his driveway, staring at the house. But the driveway was empty. The car sat there, silent and still, with the handprints on the glass. That was when he called me. It was late, past midnight, but he didn't care. He needed to hear a human voice. He told me the entire story, stumbling over his words, his voice trembling. He told me about the fog, the speeding, the figure, and the handprints. I tried to calm him down. I told him maybe he had leaned against the car earlier and didn't realize it. Maybe it was a prank by someone at the gas station. I tried to offer every logical explanation I could think of. He wouldn't hear it. He insisted that the prints were fresh. He insisted that he saw her reach out. He knew what he saw. The next morning, he went out to the car in the daylight. The handprints were still there. He took a picture of them, but the photo was blurry and hard to see against the glare of the sun. He ended up washing them off that same morning because he couldn't stand looking at them. He said he felt like the car was tainted. He never drove down that back road at night ever again. He started taking a different route home from work. It added 20 minutes to his commute, but he didn't care. He said it was worth it to avoid that specific stretch of road, that specific mailbox, and whatever was waiting in the fog. To this day, he still works at a gas station, though a different one now, and if you ask him about that night, his face will go pale. He will get quiet, but if you push him, he will tell you the story exactly the same way he told me that night. He believes with every fiber of his being that he saw something unnatural. He believes that the woman under the mailbox was not living, and he believes that if he had been driving just a little bit slower, she might have done more than just leave handprints on the glass. She might have gotten in. I don't know if I believe in ghosts. I don't know if I believe that the dead can touch our world. But I know my friend. I know he is honest. And I know that he was absolutely terrified. And sometimes that is enough to make you wonder what really hides in the fog on those dark, lonely back roads. It makes you realize that we are isolated in our little metal boxes when we drive at night. And we are not as safe as we think we are. All it takes is one foggy night, one wrong turn, and one figure waiting in the dark to change your life forever. The image of those handprints still haunts me, even though I never saw them myself. Just the idea of it, driving fast, thinking you are safe, only to find out that something touched you while you were moving. It is a violation of the laws of physics and a violation of our sense of safety. It suggests that there are things out there that are faster than us, things that want to hold on to us. So, whenever I am driving at night and the fog starts to roll in, I think of him. I slow down, I check my mirrors, and I pray that the only things I see on the side of the road are mailboxes and shadows and nothing that reaches back. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just pass through you, they stayed. Every story you heard tonight was real. Real people, real moments, and in every one of them, something went wrong, or almost did. If you want to keep exploring the stories that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Shadow Archives.